I'm Joanne Law, Director of Studies for Mediation Institute and co-founder of Interact Support. I'm on a mission to prevent violence by training and supporting dispute resolution practitioners. Mediation Musings is a series of conversations with mediators and for mediators. So if you're interested in dispute resolution, follow the channel. We're intending to update new recordings each week. Enjoy. So today I'm talking with Major James Francis. He's a regular Army officer involved in officer training. You've got some fascinating experience, so I'm really looking forward to finding out a little bit more about what you're doing. James serves on the Defence Force Dispute Resolution Panel, and he's been a conflict management coach and mediator in workplace disputes since 2012.
So thanks, Joanne. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of my experience.
What's really interesting is in your career you've been deployed a variety of complex problem-solving roles, and most recently in 2018 you were deployed in Afghanistan on the NATO Train, Advise, Assist mission with the Afghan Army Command and Staff Academy. I'm really intrigued. You shared with me that you've witnessed the Afghan military response to disputes, and I wanted to ask you if we could start there. Any insights to share about that?
Sure. So, and to put a few of my cards on the table, and the first thing to say is that I count myself pretty much as a rank outsider. I don't think I'm an expert by any stretch of the imagination, and I have a sense every time that I'm participating in dispute resolution that I'm in the midst of learning something important.
Mm.
And being part of the community, the dispute resolution community, means that I'm surrounded by people who I consider to know something about dispute resolution that I don't. And as someone who works in training, as a trainer, it's nice to be in training mode and learning mode in life, as well as being the person with some sort of semblance of authority.
Yeah, and look, I think my opinion is the best mediators always go into a mediation with that mindset that you're expecting to learn something. You're not thinking that you know it all, because then, you know, we fall into the trap of starting to generalise and stop listening. So. Yeah.
And I suppose my experience in Afghanistan at the Command and Staff Academy was it's similar to a mediation. You have your own expectations on how things will go and who these people are that you're dealing with. But the reality is sometimes, it's inevitably different. And the reality that I experienced working very closely with Afghan army officers was striking, the difference in our cultures.
Okay. Could you maybe expand on that a little bit? What struck you?
What struck me was that in a country with 30 million people who live in an area of land which is drastically smaller than Australia itself, that have a number of, let's say, competing cultures within their national identity, that is by definition a high context culture. So these people have been living together and have been working out difficulties their own way by virtue of their own cultural norms for centuries now.
Yeah.
Australia hasn't.
No.
By comparison, we're new to the game. We're the new kids. And if I imagine what life was like in the formative white settlement years of Australia, people got on with the job. If they had a problem, then they were probably quick to confront each other and to do something about it. And I think you could say that is true today, generally in Australian culture. Even what we call conflict avoided. By comparison to Asian cultures, we're still pretty upfront about wanting to get on with the job at hand and resolving conflicts as they come up. So the first thing to understand is Afghanistan is a high context culture. That means that they spend a lot of time when they talk introducing each other, introducing their tribal identity, their background, their military tribal identity and accomplishments. And it's almost as if, having presented you with all this information, you're expected to draw certain conclusions.
Okay.
And does that make sense?
Yeah, look, it does. And I was wondering what you were meaning about context. So it really is that there's meant to be a shared understanding based on some of that information.
Precisely.
And someone coming into the culture, you didn't have that. So how did you, how do you manage that?
I started off just with some guidelines in the first instance, which was to always decide in advance what I wanted to achieve with any given interaction with my counterparts. And importantly, the people I was interacting with are much senior to me by rank, by their appointment, and in their age and experience. So I had to be very clear about what I was doing, because I didn't wish to waste their time. And not being a fluent speaker of Dari, that meant that I had to spend a lot of quality time with my interpreter, talking over the issues and the probable difficulties with him, so he understood not only what I was thinking, but also how I felt about the issues that we were communicating about.
Okay, so it sounds like your interpreter is a partner in the mediation rather than just someone you just randomly plug in. Is that?
Yeah, that is precisely true. That partnership is very close, because the sharing of emotions is an incredibly intimate act of itself. So part of embedding into a role, it includes the establishment and the continual enhancement of a one-on-one relationship with an interpreter.
No, that's really interesting. I don't have a lot of experience there. I haven't really worked with interpreters in mediation. So, So any insights for people that are doing that work? Because there are lots and lots of communities in Australia where, we do need to be working with interpreters.
Yeah, that's a really valid point. I was listening to the radio this morning. They were talking about how 40% of Australia's immigration population comes to Sydney, and reflecting on the fact that I don't live in Sydney, but if I did live in Sydney, I would need greater access to people who can speak languages that I can't speak to. So one of the key insights for people who are starting to use interpreters for another language is that an interpreter won't communicate word for word what it is that you're saying. You need to establish a common understanding and check for meaning before you start with each other, before you start trying to communicate with the other party. And the next tip I would probably offer is to learn as quickly as you can some conversational words, not only greetings, but conversational words, so that even while the interpreter is the one who is speaking in the communication, you can be respectful and make yourself known that you are part of the communication at that time.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really important point, that you're showing respect for them and their language, rather than treating the fact that they don't speak your language as if it's a failing on their part.
Yeah. So that was my start point, Joanne, and really, it wasn't until about 6 months into this relationship that there was any real deep level of trust had been established between us. So there's a couple of things I could talk about there, and I'll probably just talk about that trust first. That in the initial days, I had done what I would probably call now a bit of a cultural faux pas. I had come into an organisation, had a look around, and after about a month, I made 4 or 5 suggestions, not knowing, and they certainly weren't connected with blame or criticism. They were just observations that these are areas that could be improved, but not knowing that in Afghan culture, seeing is believing. So whilst in Australian culture, we seem to be energised and motivated with the beginning of creating an idea or creating change or generating the momentum of change. But in Afghan culture, for them, seeing is believing. So they're very standoffish and unenthusiastic.
Okay, so what could you expand a little bit what you mean by seeing is believing?
Yes, so you can advocate any number of good ideas of things that could be done, but you're dealing with people in a country that has either been at war or recovering from war since 1979 in recent history, and at least once a generation over the last 200 or so years. So they've had no shortage of people from outside their own culture and their own context telling them that they're doing things the wrong way or they could be doing things better. So seeing is believing to them is when they actually see that change is possible, they'll invest in change.
Okay, so they're not. I suppose if you put it in a different context, in a workplace that's had a lot of different managers and all these programs going through, often the people become really jaded. And
I think you've done a great reframe there. I think that is how we would apply it in Australia.
Yeah, just trying to get an understanding in the context. I know because I've never been in a war zone, or I did live in Chile for a while, and there were people with guns on the corners, but not nowhere near where the sort of places that you've been. No, I often use war as a metaphor when I'm mediating because I work in family law, but you're you're dealing with people where that's actually a reality.
And I think there's an interesting nuance between the word conflict and the word dispute. So the vast majority of what I come up against in Australian workplaces is just disputes.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's conflict, that has overtones. The word itself has overtones of being entrenched and sort of being rooted in the structure of the organisation and completely differing values of groups of people contributing to a conflict. And that was certainly, that's evident in Afghanistan, but that was certainly the case of the civil war in the former Yugoslavia.
Because that's centuries old, that conflict, I suppose.
Indeed.
So it's not something you're going to necessarily waltz in and fix in a 3-hour mediation.
No, and so to reflect further on Afghan culture, I said the 6-month mark was an interesting point because it was at the adjournment of a meeting of drinking chai with my colonel one day that the colonel in his greeting in his farewell used a cliche that I was not familiar with. And when I had left the room, I asked my interpreter, what was it? What was that cliche that he used? He said, he called you brother. So it took 6 months for a level of trust and intimacy to be adopted and then after 2 months after that, I was then presented with all the good ideas that I trotted out with after the first month. But in this case, their ownership was, they had Afghan ownership, and I had a sense, not that I'd won, but I had a sense of success, if only by fraction at that point in time. The real dispute situation or experience was what the Afghans called a commission. Would you like me to discuss that with you?
Yeah, look, I think everyone, hopefully everyone's as fascinated as I am. Too bad if they're not. I'm very interested.
Oh, that's great. So the Afghan seniors within their army, at least, if they're having a dispute over not necessarily a truth, but over responsibility, and with responsibility comes prestige. So prestige is important within their social values. So it can become pretentious if an issue has a prestigious element to it. Anyway, one such circumstance arose, and there were maybe 5 different stakeholders, and amongst those stakeholders included myself and my boss, who was a German officer. So this deployment for me last year was a first, in as much as we had Australian officers working directly for German officers.
Okay.
And so I was invited, along with my German boss, to participate in a commission. And what happens in a commission is that the senior officer present convenes all the different stakeholders. He presents the problem as he understands it, and then he invites each of the stakeholders to give their perspective. Does that make sense?
Okay, yeah. So those multi-party things where everyone's got different perspectives on what the issue is and why it's an issue and that type of thing.
Yeah, that's right. So not 100 miles away from a group facilitation, but this was more self-regulatory, in as much that once each of the people in the room had their say, it got back to the officer who convened, the general who was convening the commission, who made some reflecting comments, and then we started the whole process again, having heard everyone's perspective.
Okay. So it's, I guess it's quite, it's probably similar in some ways with some of the Indigenous mediations that occur in Australia as well. So where tradition and culture and context are really, really important. Yeah. So because people are, I suppose there's connections and I guess, well, I suppose pride and those sorts of things are important. Prestige, as being, so face,
yes,
is saving face, and that I imagine would be something that would impact on the mediations or the facilitations that you do in that context.
And it was in this fashion that people were able to align their position, given an understanding of everyone else's perspective and where they sat in connection with each other.
Okay.
It was an opportunity to solve a problem while saving face.
Yeah. So just correct me if I'm wrong. Is it kind of that the stories were able to kind of gradually change as after that, or not round robin, but after that opportunity to get a feel, so people are able to adjust?
Yes, yeah, they started to look at what they could do instead of what they were determined not to do.
Okay.
And I think part of that is just the respect that is accorded when you sit down with the other stakeholders as equals, and do something very simple like have a cup of chai together, because drinking tea together is an auspicious part of their cultural rituals, which means that you are embraced as a guest and protected as a guest.
Yeah, which would be very important as well.
Yeah.
So
it's the alternative.
Definitely. Look, I might just change track a bit as well. So I know that you've been doing some, some general workplace mediation in the Defence Force. So between service people, service personnel, and public servants, or others that are employees rather than enlisted people.
Yes.
And I guess we also know that, like first responders, like a lot of areas, there's an issue with post-traumatic stress and some of those issues. Any thoughts about those kind of themes? I guess how.
Not. I think the first thing that you mentioned, I'll put workplace stresses aside. The first thing that you mentioned was the collection of cultures which exist within defence. So if we say defence, everyone in their mind now will have a picture probably of a person in a uniform, but the Defence Force is made up of not only uniformed personnel but public servants, and who don't wear uniforms, who have a similar but distinctly different set of core values that they work to, as do each of the services have different values as well. And so just in the same way that there is a time of adjustment for me to work across cultures in Afghanistan or Iraq, for instance, there's also adjustment which is required when you have uniform and non-uniform people working together. So that's the first thing I'd probably make the observation about. And sometimes this has been the source of friction or a source of breakdown in communication in the workplace. And it's contributed to different expectations between what's expected by someone who's in uniform and someone who is not in uniform. And I'm not saying one's right or one's wrong, but they're just different. They're different.
Yeah, and I've heard you talking about culture a lot in all of these contexts. It's being such an important thing for you as the mediator to have that awareness, not to, I guess, ride roughshod across other people's worldviews.
And culture is always one of those things within the intake where I personally, and I know other panel members are trying to assess, well, what are the unwritten rules about communicating in this organisation and how things actually get done, regardless of what the posters might be in the wall, because that will give you greater context of understanding of what it is, where the dispute lies, and what some of the contributing factors to that might be. And culture I consider to be those unwritten and sometimes unspoken practices that people in the one workplace share together.
Yeah, no, it's and share in large or small groups. Definitely find different bubbles within the same apparent workplace.
Yeah, for sure. You also mentioned sensitivity to people who are under stress, and that is, I would say that dispute resolution practitioners who work in defence are vigilant towards that. If someone who has reached out for help, it's up to them to declare if there are certain circumstances or words or conditions that might be a trigger for them.
Yeah.
If there's a suspicion of that, you know, I might mention it. But I actually conducted an intervention once, and during the course of that intervention, I called an adjournment because I didn't understand the body language of one of the people in the facilitated conversation, and it turned out that this individual was basically being triggered through the body language of the other person, and it was never their intention, but they'd been a victim of an attack, an unprovoked attack, and that was before they'd even joined the army, you know. So they were responding to a stimulus, and I had no way of knowing that. All that I had was to be equipped with the tool of curiosity and and to use that curiosity when I saw behaviour that was challenging the process.
Yeah, look, that's fascinating, because I've actually got a group supervision tomorrow, and transference is one of the things that I was going to talk to people about. You know, that kind of non-verbal thing that can sometimes happen to us, where we take on other people's emotions, and or triggered by something that's completely unrelated to now.
Yes.
But impacts now. So that was a perfect example of that. So thank you very much. I'll use that.
My pleasure.
Oh, very kind of you.
and that's the beauty of debriefing too, is to have a community of dispute resolution practitioners around me that I can share my experience with, and that they can help to put these things into a number of different perspectives for me, and to contribute to my skill set as a practitioner.
Yeah, look, I think it's absolutely essential to, protect ourselves, because things rub off on us as well, just as much as they do for any other people. Precisely. We're not made of Teflon.
No.
So one of the things that I know that is being used in the Defence Forces is conflict management coaching
Yes.
and support for people in their interpersonal skills, I suppose.
Yes.
Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Certainly. So I stumbled into conflict management coaching by accident. I was researching for the development of a leadership program within Army, looking at different skills, and I did the course, which was provided at the time by Leader through license from Cine Noble, and I was staggered just how much what was being advocated resonated with my own thoughts and beliefs, and certainly that was my introduction into dispute resolution within Defence. So personally, I have a strong affiliation with coaching. It has influenced my understanding of dispute resolution, and within Defence, what occurs is that when an issue has been referred for assistance, then some sort of scoping occurs.
Okay.
And it's within that scoping we try to determine whether the individual stakeholders, where are they at? What skills do they have to be able to have a difficult conversation with someone, or where is their attitude at? Are they willing? How willing are they? Do they just lack a bit of confidence in that? And so if there's any shadow in any of those sorts of areas, then Defence is a positive advocate in the use of conflict managing coaching to prepare someone for a mediation or a facilitated conversation, and also to use it in follow-up as well.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think that's really great advice and reminder for us all that, we come in for an intervention with mediation, but often there's skills that people need to develop, and coaching is a really good, respectful and appropriate way for people, particularly senior people, to be able to develop those skills that maybe they haven't quite got at the level they need to be.
Yeah, and I find myself using those skills of coaching every day.
Yeah.
Every day. So if someone strikes me with a problem or a need, I'm pretty keen on trying to reframe it as a question for their, what is it that they need, or
so using that questioning methodology that we use as coaches, rather than telling people.
yeah, exactly.
Which is always gets in a lot easier.
Yeah.
So one of the things I generally ask people is, any tips that you might have for people entering the industry, and I noticed that you really highlighted the importance of the pre-mediation, the preparation for people.
Yeah. So
talk a little bit more about that, because that's actually it's kind of a weakness in the in the NMAS, that it doesn't require practical work in that.
Yeah. So that's it. I think it's interesting too that you've identified it as an area that could be better in training. And certainly when I did my training, it was a real grey area, because the other trainees and I would say, okay, you've given us this scenario. How did we know this?
Yeah. How did we get here? Miraculously, we're there. Exactly.
And so, and so, if it's to me to bestow, I'll try that again. Bestow a tip.
Yeah.
Then Stephen Covey, one of his habits of highly effective people, said you should start with the end in mind. And the end in mind for mediation is people solving their own problems.
Yeah.
And we're just facilitators of that. We don't have a stake in it.
Yeah.
And if for them to be able to solve their problems, then they need a hand in being shifted in their thinking. Just the same way that I do, like any human being does. So that time in intake is, if there's an opportunity there to start and investigate, well, how do you think that might be for the other person, and just test them on empathising, and those, if the conditions are right, then ask them those questions about the other person and what their perspective might be. Then that's the beginning of the process that I'm probably seeking through a mediation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, look, it absolutely does, because we know that the process, the dynamics of conflict turn the other person into the other, that's not quite, doesn't have the same human thoughts and feelings as they do. And so reminding them that, that's probably not quite true. Or if it is, how are they going to react? Is what you're proposing really going to be, is it realistic? They can't get beyond, because once again, it's, quite often you find that people have demonised the other. So
Sure.
If we can unpick any of that, that's helpful.
Yeah. So I hope that tip helps.
Yeah, look, I think it definitely will, and it's Yeah, it's something that people don't always do. Oh no, I noticed that you participated in one of Bill Eddy's workshops as well,
Yeah,
about dealing
yeah.
with high conflict people. And have have
So,
you
so th-
found that you're using some of those strategies around getting proposals and?
Certainly, I've got to say that of all the information that I've gleaned from Bill Eddy's literature and his DVDs and his workshops, I have found that cliche. So okay. So what's your proposal? That's useful. But what I actually use the most is the skills around empathising with people when they are, emotionally upset,
Yeah.
when they're in a heightened state of upset, and I've become vigilant to those sort of situations when I'm meeting people who are in entrenched conflict in particular.
Yeah.
That's really it's given me a frame of reference, Joanne. That's it's given me a frame. I don't have to. I think that Bill has given us the permission to use them as a frame of reference without having to pronounce someone as being, antisocial behaviour or whatever. He encourages you to just identify the behaviour and work out whether you can manage that behaviour, or in extreme, if you can't manage that behaviour. And I've actually used that as a bit of a guide for myself to say, you know what, I don't think I'm the right person to deal with this individual when they're manifesting.
Yeah, that strategy that Bill has around acknowledging the emotion, showing the empathy, because it's not necessarily that their behaviour. Sometimes people take an attitude that they don't deserve a reward for their bad behaviour, which is really unhelpful. Because if we don't, these people can't manage their own emotions properly. That's why they're high conflict. And so unless we provide acknowledgement and help them to calm, they're not going to be able to.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And that's a great thing, to be in a position to provide that assistance to someone, because that open loop system of how Bill describes our emotions, being able to close that and help the person transition into their logical mind, that's a gift if you're someone who's spends a lot of their time in heightened awareness of the heightened emotion.
Oh, look, absolutely. So no, look, this has been a wonderful chat, and I could stay talking to you for ages, but I won't do that because I'm very respectful of your time as well. But I guess just as a final takeaway, are there any thoughts you'd like to leave people with?
Yeah. So in dispute resolution, and as I said at the beginning, I'm not an expert. And it's because of the fact that I'm not an expert, I think I've grown to respect the process. And so if in the process, if in the course of conducting a mediation, either of the participants or the mediators, for that matter, have the sense that they want to withdraw their permission, and I've experienced this, well then my tip is to just respect the process, just follow that process and respect it, and the outcomes will work themselves out. I'm not so big enough I can see around the corner and say, no, don't do that. What you need is mediation. So I've learned to just respect the process and respect other people's position as well when it comes to this, and see what happens as a result of their decisions and my decision as well.
Yeah, and I guess for me, in some ways, just a reminder that not to become religious about mediation.
Yeah. Amen.
Exactly. It's easy to fall into that trap, but we need to remember it's a really, really good process for the right people and
for the right people.
time and the right context.
Yeah, I agree.
So now look, that's wonderful. I'm going to put up the you've mentioned a couple of resources that you've used, so it's all your fault at work, Bill Eddy's book, which is a really good one. I'm actually reading one of his newer ones at the moment. I can't remember the title, but it's the same sort of thing, just reinforcing for me.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of Bill's work. And Conflict Mastery Questions to Guide You by Cindy Noble, rather. So what?
On my desk.
Oh, look at that! Yeah. and so what's that? The kind of questions and different ways to kind of tease open conflict is. How would you describe that book?
It's. I would describe it as like it's like the TARDIS. There's just so much. There's so much in it. There's so many different aspects to conflict, and Cindy reminds me of that when I open a chapter. It really is good to have people who are clearly, by the definition, masters of this trade around that you can refer to. Yeah. And Cindy is one of them, and the Mastery of Conflict Questions is a book that entices me in that direction. So it challenges me too. So I enjoy reading it.
No, that's wonderful, and doing that, you dip in and you find things that no matter how many times you've read it that you haven't come across before.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is what a great book always has.
Yeah.
But look, thank you so much. As I said, I'll be sharing this out on the podcast and also a link. So are you comfortable with me putting up a link to your LinkedIn profile or whatever?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
That's
and ask more questions?
Yeah, that'd be great. That questions would be excellent.
Yeah, excellent. Sure. Okay, that's wonderful. So thank you so much for your time. I'm sure that people
My pleasure.
Really interested in our conversation.
Thanks, Joanne.
No.
Bye now.